My brothers and sisters, I would like to share a story with you, but first a reflection on today's gospel. And there are two specific lines I want to look at. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been looking for you with great anxiety." And Jesus advanced in wisdom and age and favor before God and man. I think we are so used to thinking of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph as the Holy Family, and with a lot of titles we also give them, that we forget they were human and had normal human emotions and had to grow and mature. As a side note, Jesus was fully human and fully divine, so you may wonder why he had to grow in wisdom. Pope St. John Paul II said, "The fullness of grace in Jesus was in proportion to his age. There was always fullness, but a fullness which increased as he grew in age. The same can be said of the wisdom which Christ had from the beginning in the fullness proper to the period of childhood. As he advanced in age, this fullness grew in him to a proportionate degree." It's also important to remember that events in the gospel aren't standalone, but they're steps or stages in the lives of the characters, and that between the stories, life was taking place. They were experiencing, they were growing and changing. They were loving and laughing, crying and dying. Age brings change. I'm 66. I'm not the same person I was when I was 46 or 26 or 16. Praise God. I've had experiences, both good and bad, that molded me and shaped me. So what does this have to do with the Holy Family, and what does it have to do with us? I think most of us have had times when we've cried out, "Why, God?" And then we'll beat ourselves up because we'll go through something, we'll recognize God's work in our lives, we gain peace, and then at the next crisis, we're right back to, "Why, God?" We don't need to beat ourselves up. You see, in spiritual development, there's a term known as consolations and desolations. The consolations are times when we are aware of God's presence, and desolations are times when it seems like he is absent. Note, I said when it seems like he is absent, because he is never absent. I don't have time to develop this, but essentially, as we grow in our spirituality, God, in his great love for us, takes us through times of great consolations and times of great desolations as a way of teaching us, of drawing us closer to him and deepening our trust. I think it's the same as in bodybuilding. No pain, no gain. It might help if you think of it as a spiral instead of a closed circle. If you're interested in learning more, I suggest any of the books by Father Timothy Gallagher on Ignatian spirituality and the discernment of spirits. Let's focus on Mary for a bit. I would suggest that Mary, at the Annunciation, when she was about 14, is not the same as Mary at the finding in the temple, when she would have been about 28. And she's not the same Mary as at the resurrection when she was about 48. Oh, she was the same in the sense that her fingerprints were the same. But she was affected by her experiences. So what did she experience? Well, for an example, let's break open the flight to Egypt. From Matthew, we read, "Behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, 'Rise, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt and stay there until I tell you. Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him.' Joseph rose and took the child and his mother by night and started for Egypt. Let's put this in perspective. Ladies, assume that you are 17 years old. You have a nursing 18-month-old son. Your husband wakes you at 2 a.m. and tells you that an angel in a dream said that the three of you need to leave immediately for San Diego to escape soldiers who want to kill your son. No problem, because you've already learned to be supermom. So you throw together disposable diapers, snacks, collapsible stroller, clean change of clothes for you and your husband. You've got the MasterCard that will take care of lodging and additional necessities. You've got the chargers for the cell phones. And if you have to stay for a while in San Diego, your mom can ship stuff to the closest UPS store. And while you're throwing this together, your husband has been on Expedia to get the best deals and has contacted Uber for a ride to the airport and then to the hotel. So figure an hour and a half by jet and you'll be safe drinking iced tea by the pool by noon. Except there are no disposable diapers. There is no MasterCard, no Uber, no jet, no UPS, no stroller, no cell phones, no hotel pool, no iced tea. You will be walking, and you'll be carrying your child. You may or may not have a donkey, but in either case, you're walking. And you'll be carrying your son because your husband, who is an itinerant carpenter, will be carrying his tools and everything else you own. Gentlemen, you're probably at least twice your wife's age, and you are responsible for the safety of your wife and your son. You have to find food, water, shelter. You'll probably have to find work as you travel in order to support your wife and child. And since your wife is nursing, you need to make sure she has enough to eat in order to produce the milk. Which means if anyone goes hungry, it's gonna be you. You have to be on the lookout for soldiers who want to harm your son, for bandits, and for those who might disrespect your wife. All strangers are suspect and no place is safe. And in this time period, people normally traveled in caravans for safety. Are you able to find a group leaving at 3 a.m., or is it just the three of you striking out on your own? Now, for my example, I chose Mesa to San Diego because, taken as a crow flies, it's pretty close to the distance from Bethlehem to Egypt, and it consists of desert and mountain ranges. We'll call it 350 miles. Now, I figure that a 17-year-old girl in reasonable shape could walk 10 miles in a day on average. I realize that if a mall is involved, that could be twice that amount. But it also might be a little bit light. But I think if we factor in desert conditions, resting during the hottest part of the day, and having to make and break camp, 10's a good working number. So figure 35 days to walk to San Diego. And then I asked some knowledgeable friends, what would happen if we take that same girl, but make her a nursing mother carrying an 18-month-old child? They said daily average would drop to 5 miles a day or less. So now we're looking at 70-plus days to San Diego. And then there are those times when you have to stop to earn money for the next leg of the trip. 90-plus days, and every day you have to be vigilant. There is no indication that Mary and Joseph had an easier time of it than anyone else. No angels traveled ahead each day to prepare the meal and set up the tents. So stop for a second, and can you see on this Feast of the Holy Family how much Joseph and Mary would have had to rely on each other? They had to rely on each other to survive. And can you see how important the bond is between husband and wife? Now, Father John, in some of his homilies, has mentioned how tough Mary was. And I would have to second that. But at the same time, she had to be tender because she had a husband and a son to look after. And I sometimes wonder in the evening, sitting around a fire, what would have been the discussion, the dialogue between Mary and Joseph? The tenderness, the gentleness. Now let's shift focus to about 10 or 11 years later. Mary, Joseph, and Jesus have been to Jerusalem for the Passover. Now, at this point, Mary's about 28, and Joseph is probably beyond 40. That's just a guess. Jesus, who is 12, is free to run around and join his friends. It'll take several days to make the 60-mile walk, but they're with family and friends, so it's a pleasant time of socializing. And then as evening comes, they start looking for Jesus, and they can't find him. Imagine their growing distress as they look for him among relatives and acquaintances. And by the way, this is Passover. There could have been thousands traveling that same road. Now think about this for a second. By this point in their lives, Mary has already had one face-to-face interaction with an archangel. She'd given birth to a son when she knew she hadn't had physical relations with a man. And she had the visitation of the wise men. And Joseph had had 3 different visitations by angels in dreams who gave him instructions, as well as his own interaction with the 3 wise men and the shepherds. They had experienced the flight to Egypt and eventually the return home to Nazareth. Now, doesn't it make you wonder, why couldn't God have sent an angel, either in person or in a dream, just to say, be at peace, he's safe in the temple? Do you think God might have been able to call on one angel out of all of the ones there? You know, maybe Gabriel, he already knew what Mary looked like. He could have stopped back down. But he didn't. So why didn't he? And that got me thinking about the flight to Egypt. Why the flight to Egypt? Why couldn't God have mystically transported them? Why didn't God surround them with angels to protect them? Make it simple, why didn't God strike Herod dead? That would have ended the slaughter. And when they couldn't find Jesus, don't you think that Mary and Joseph would have stormed heaven with prayers of supplication? 12 years before, it was hail full of grace, and now it's silence. Why? It's just my opinion, but I think one reason was because that isn't how God chose to do it. Think about it. If God had chosen to use mystical means to assist the Holy Family, we would have a harder time relating to them and asking them for their intercession. When ones as holy as Mary and Joseph have problems, it helps us to understand it's normal for us to have problems. My sisters, I do not pretend that I know what struggles you have. As a woman, a wife, a mother, I don't know. But Mary does. And not just because of her position as Queen of Heaven, but because of the life she led. She buried her husband. She fled the country for the life of her child. She would have entered the lives of her relatives and friends. She watched her son being tortured to death and put in the cave. And she witnessed the resurrection. Do you think maybe she can relate to you? And my brothers, I don't pretend to know your struggles. I don't know what it's like to have a wife and child depending on me. But Joseph does. I would suggest that shepherding a wife and son over 350 miles of desert while escaping the military can give wisdom to a man. And teens, I'm not even going to pretend I know what you go through. It's been about 50 years since I worried about being a teenager. I will tell you that there's a part in my brain labeled years 13 through 19. If I could have it removed from my brain, I would do so. I figured it would save me about $10,000 in therapy. But consider that Mary was, again, 15, 16 years old when she spent possibly 3 months hiking across the desert to save her child. And I know when I was a teenager, it was hard for me to believe that somebody in their 60s might have something to offer for advice. But if I may, there is one thing that I have experienced, and that is that when I was a teenager, I would look at somebody in their 60s, and I just knew they had it all together. And I didn't have to worry about the stuff I was learning as a teenager, because by the time I got to the elderly age of the 30s, I wouldn't have any of the problems. I was wrong. And Megan and her core are teaching you wonderful things that even if you don't know the purpose of them right now, they will be tools, they will be beliefs, they will be things that later on, when life starts to fall apart, you can hang on to. And you are in a blessed position because you have the opportunity to learn to not make the mistakes I was making when I was 50. You know? Okay, I promised you a story. Sorry, got ahead of myself. So as we read through the saga of the Holy Family, we see the need for trust, for action, for understanding, for forbearance. We see that there is pain and joy, that there are consolations and desolations. We see the need for a close, integrated family in order to survive, to give mutual support in good times and in bad. Now, I promised you a story. There are those here who feel that they have no family for whatever reason. Because of home life, maybe you're away from home. Maybe there's a lot of pain. Maybe you feel like no one would notice if you disappeared off the face of the earth. And that it seems like your only companion is an empty ache in your heart. And when you feel that way, it can really hurt to hear someone promoting families and relationships, especially when you just know that person talking has never had a lonely day in their life. At this point, some of you might be thinking, okay, now he's going to tell me to reach out to Jesus. No, I have another plan for you. If you hurt, if you feel alone, if you feel like a stranger, if you think nobody cares about you, I invite you to look around and meet the family of St. Timothy's. If you accept them, they will be your family, should you accept it. When I first started coming to St. Timothy's 24 years ago, I felt like an outsider. Back then, we would have masses that filled all the way back onto the stage. It was an interesting experience coming to Mass with 800 people and feel alone the entire time. I guess the people probably were welcoming, but I wasn't in a place where I could see it. My life was filled with anger. I carried a deep rage within me. In many ways, I was not a nice person to be around. My wife heard this homily this morning and she agreed with me. You see, I thought there was a special handshake or password in order to belong. But one day they were setting up for a parish picnic, and the pastor and someone else moved one of the tables. I saw a box of Heinz relish packets on the ground, so I picked them up and moved them to the new location. And the pastor said, "Thanks, Jim." And I realized there was no password, there was no secret handshake. It was just a matter of getting involved. So I recommend you look for ways to be involved. The more I volunteered, the more I got involved. The more I got involved, the more I felt at home. The more I felt at home, well, eventually I became Catholic. I married Sandy, my wife, and I went through formation to be ordained as a deacon. That's an awful lot to put on one packet of relishes. Yeah. But through that time, many of you walked the journey with us. When she and I had our final interview before ordination, we told Bishop Olmsted that no one from our biological families would be coming to the ordination. He got quiet for a moment and said, "St. Timothy's really is your family, isn't it?" Neither Sandy nor I are the same people we were when we first walked through these doors. And much of that change is the direct result of our interacting with you. It reminds me of a time I was at an AA meeting and was talking to somebody about things that I was going through, and this lady looked at me and she said, "We don't shoot our wounded." And that's St. Timothy's. We don't shoot our wounded. And you didn't stop with us. There's PAWS, St. Vincent de Paul, pancake breakfast, soup and stations, giving and attending retreats, Christmas tree gifts, generous with time, talent, and treasure. You put up Christmas lights. You provide a chapel makeover, a reliquarium, new pews, and a carpet. You pray for your clergy and support your seminarians. I have seen people come to a funeral for someone they didn't know just to show support for the family. Family? Oh my, yes. I've been coming to St. Timothy's for about 24 years and Sandy for about 30. In the years we have been at St. Tim's, we have seen a variety of clergy. We've had multiple bishops with at least one diocesan administrator. We've seen a number of pastors, parochial vicars, parochial administrators, associate pastors, interim parochial administrators, retired priests, and assorted deacons. Some priests went on to be good pastors. Sometimes it was in spite of our expectations. And at least one went on to be a bishop. Some that seemed to have the most promise ended up leaving the priesthood or even the church. Some, because of things that were revealed during their time here, were given additional assistance and guidance by the diocese that allowed them to become the pastors they were called to be. We had a deacon die, and we had a beloved associate pastor pass away during Holy Week. I still haven't forgiven Father Marcel for doing that. He'd been sick with pancreatic cancer, and I think it was the most Lenten Lent we ever experienced. As Sandy and I were discussing the history of St. Timothy's, three things became clear. The cycle of consolations and desolation that God takes people through to mature them and draw them close can also happen to parishes. St. Timothy's is an excellent place to let clergy try their wings because you love your clergy. And finally, priests and deacons may come and they may go. Individual parishioners may come and they may go. But what stays, what maintains, is the spirit the family. We are the family of St. Timothy's, and we are St. Timothy's family.